Remakes and remasters. Once the reserve of game studios who were officially out of ideas, the concept of retreading the games of old with shinier, handsomer, more realistic versions of the characters we know and love has almost officially become its own subgenre. And arguably, no genre of games benefits from a gentle wander down suppressed memory lane than horror. Sure, the polygon graphics and bin-lid sound design of the PlayStation 1 and 2 era has its charms, and arguably the tinny sound and uncanny on-rails movement of the monsters that haunt our old-gen consoles made them scarier to us than any modern day engine could hope to replicate, but Resident Evil 2 Remake has already proven you can scale up old horror experiences into brand new terrifying tales with enough know-how and blood splatter. 2023 has already given us two incredible remakes plucked from our recurrent nightmares circa the mid to late 2000s in the Dead Space Remake and the Resident Evil 4 Remake. Should the fact that two of the most critically acclaimed games of this year are actually just weaponized nostalgia upgrades of games that came out well over a decade ago be a concern? Possibly. But I like them. And these recent releases got us delving into the horrors of our past to have a think about a few more classic horror games that are long due another swing at our jugulars. Here's 5 old school horror games that desperately need remakes.
Now it's time to put your blade to work.
When you think of maddeningly difficult platform challenges meshed with creepy but nonetheless fantastical action-adventure, the horror genre probably isn't the first place your mind goes, but Alice Madness Returns definitely fits the bill. Following the misadventures of the titular Alice as she traverses a corrupted wonderland, the game seamlessly combines vexingly difficult platform puzzles worthy of the Mad Hatter himself, with some pretty decent combat and a story that explores trauma, guilt, and dealing with the darkness in one's own past. It's a perfect nightmare for anyone who grew up reading Alice in Wonderland or watching any of the acid trip style films based off of it. The character designs, limited though they were by the graphics of 2011, were perfect corruptions of the classic fairy tale characters. The level designs were nightmarish, distorted versions of the, let's face it, already pretty messed up and weird worlds created by Lewis Carroll. Sure, it wasn't perfect, the combat controls could do with a tweak, and the platforming did occasionally do a Crash 4, and seep over from difficult but doable with enough practice into bullshit I'll never play again territory, but it rewarded dedicated players with a deliciously dark take on the Alice story. Join me then as I imagine a fully reimagined twisted Wonderland with current gen visuals, a few choice gameplay mechanic upgrades to make things a little more manageable, and expanded levels that fully explore the darkness at the heart of the Alice in Wonderland story. The doorgirl boss fight alone would be enough to send the internet into meltdown considering everyone's visceral reaction to Angie in Resident Evil Village. Look at this. Can you even picture what that would look like in a modern engine? Because I'd rather not. And considering we've recently learned that EA will be disappearing like the Cheshire Cat and dumping the long-rumoured sequel, Alice Asylum, back at the creepy orphanage never to be seen again, a remake of this cult classic is the least they could do. Some true horror for you now. A pop quiz. Do you know what the first M-rated game Nintendo ever released was? Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem dropped on the GameCube back in 2002, and despite widespread critical acclaim, the game absolutely tanked, which basically caused the downfall of the entire studio that made it and sent any hopes of a sequel straight to hell. Which is a real shame because Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem, aside from a ridiculously long name, took a lot of inspiration from the works of H.P. Lovecraft in its monster design, plot, and themes around sanity and the absolute pointlessness of existence. Where the game really stands out from the undead crowd though is with its sanity meter mechanic, which, once emptied, caused some odd effects to take over the game. And if this is starting to sound a bit too Amnesia the Dark Descent for you, well, Eternal Darkness did it first. Instead of just making your character seem more insane the lower their insanity meter drops, Eternal Darkness caused effects that would make the player question their own sanity, occasionally creating the illusion that your GameCube had switched itself off, or your save file had been corrupted, or your TV had muted itself even though you're the only one in the room. And that's outside of actual gameplay weirdness from the camera controls inverting and becoming incredibly sensitive to using a healing item that just randomly causes your character to explode. Although you don't actually die, it's just the game messing with you again. Haha, very funny, please stop. The potential from the sanity mechanic alone is absolutely huge on current gen consoles and PC. Haptic feedback opens a whole new world of ways for devs to F up players with sanity effects, as well as causing the console to beep like it's been turned off maybe, whispering voices out of your controller, and sure, it'd be nice to see the boss fights and enemy designs with full eldritch horror cinematics and visuals, and Cthulhu knows the gameplay would need a bit of a level up, but if Resident Evil 2 can do it, and so can Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem. This game has literally been stuck in purgatory since 2002, so can we please get Eternal Darkness back in the spotlight? Alright Capcom, this entry is aimed squarely at you and your apparent hatred of your own golden child. Dino Crisis is, well, I struggle to even call it a cult classic at this point, considering how much everyone seems to love it, and with good reason. It's the perfect mutation of Resident Evil and Jurassic Park that even now, as a child born in the early 90s, still fuels my nostalgia cravings some 24 years later after it released. The initial concept is a very simple one. You're an agent who lands on an island, hunt down a baddie, and there are dinosaurs everywhere that want to eat you. Have fun. And I can't be alone in thinking, well, I bloody loved every single one of the Resident Evil remakes, not you, Resident Evil 3, and if Capcom are so wonderful at recreating their games for a modern audience, why the hell haven't they revisited Dino Crisis? If they're worried about the story being too camp or outlandish, it makes me wonder if they even read the script for the Resi 2 and 4 remakes. And it's not as if dinosaurs are going out of fashion. Chris Pratt has personally seen to that. If I seem pressed, it's only because I actually really like dinosaurs and games with dinosaurs in them. And I feel like it's been way too long since I've been chased by a T-Rex in a, and I should stress this, good video game. A Dino Crisis remake in the style of the Resi 2 remake would be an almost guaranteed banger for Capcom. The T-Rex jump scare is right up there with Mr. X's first appearance, or Nemesis's debut attempt to murder Jill. So that alone would be worth the price of admission. It's been 20 years since Dino Crisis went extinct, and honestly it's about time life hurried up and found a way already. Oh look, another survival horror PS3, Xbox 360 era game ripe for a remake. And unlike the rest of the games on this list, Fear breaks the mold by being a first-person shooter survival horror. And if you don't think that can be spooky, well, I'd like to introduce you to a certain house in Resi Village at some point. Taking a hell of a lot of inspiration from Japanese horror, you don't need to be a horror connoisseur to spot the similarities between main antagonist and serial stalker Alma and Samara from the Ring movies. The game's atmosphere is incredibly creepy at times, particularly during the hallucinations that haunt the player's every step. And even with a whole armoury of weapons at your disposal, the visceral reaction most of us have to creepy children laughing in dark corners never really goes away. Ultimately, Fear is a bit of a victim of its time. I remembered the graphics blowing me away when I first picked the game up, but they haven't held up well, and neither really have a lot of the mechanics. But there's a solid base there for an incredible remake. The enemy AI was revolutionary at the time, making fights incredibly varied and unpredictable, and when the horror stepped it up, it made sure it landed every single shot. Being hunted by Alma is genuinely terrifying, and that iconic shot of her standing at the top of the ladder as you go to climb down, still gives me shivers when I see it today. It's not a likely contender, but first-person horror is on the up again thanks to Resi, so it might not be over for Fear yet. We'd forgive you if you didn't know this game existed, which is why it needs bringing back from the dead. The Thing video game was a direct follow-up to the iconic movie of the same name, and even had the blessing of legendary director John Carpenter, who had a cameo in the game. If somehow you haven't heard of The Thing, in which case go and watch it immediately once you've got to the end of this video, its whole shtick is that it can take over the form of anyone it likes, including people you thought were your friends. Throughout the game, the player leads a team of AI NPCs who react to their orders, each with their own unique classes and skill sets. The issue is, as the Thing begins to wreak havoc on our heroes, NPC teammates start to distrust you. And if their trust went low enough, they'd either flat out ignore you, making the game even harder, or attack outright, forcing you to go against them. As a result, the horror doesn't just come from the monster itself, but from managing the panic among your squad as well. Your teammates can get infected by the Thing and eventually transform into monstrosities bought straight from the movie, that in a modern engine would have the potential to be truly sickening to look at. Fans and critics at the time actually praised the Thing for its more action-focused gameplay sprinkled with copious amounts of body horror. Something survival horror has been trying to do for decades with wildly varying degrees of success, so it was actually ahead of its time if you think about it. Sadly, as is often the case with these games, rights were lost and a sequel never made it off the cutting room floor. And tragically, the game has been kept on ice ever since. But even without considering the upgrades to gameplay and graphics a remake would bring, can you imagine an online multiplayer version of this? The success of social deduction games like Among Us and cooperative horror games like Dead by Daylight could make this a streamer's paradise. One squad mate becomes infected by the Thing and has to stop the party from making it through the game and defeating the creature for good. Or you can just play by yourself and get more and more paranoid as your squad turns against you. Either way, the Thing deserves a remake. So there you have it, 5 classic or forgotten horror games that deserve the Resident Evil treatment. Did we miss your favourite? Stick your suggestions down in the comments below. And if you need more survival horror content to get your teeth into, check out these videos here.